Welcome to the Communities of Character podcast, the show that shares rich conversation about character development across different vocations and callings. I'm Jennifer Hogan, and today we're talking about the 11 Principles Framework with Dr. Kara Chism. Dr. Chism is a professor in the Instructional Leadership Program and director of the Master of Science program for the Orlean Beeson School of Education, as well as the director of professional learning for Hope Institute. Prior to returning to Samford University as an employee, she spent 21 years in public education as a teacher and administrator at the elementary, middle school, high school, and district office levels. Her research interests include character development in schools and educational leadership. Dr. Chism enjoys being outdoors, traveling, and participating in church planting mission trips. You're in for a treat as we discuss the 11 Principles Framework on this inaugural episode. Thank you for joining us for our first episode of the Communities of Character podcast, a place where you can learn about all things character. I'm your host, Jennifer Hogan, and we are kicking off the podcast with a series on the 11 Principles Framework for Schools from character.org. And today's guest is Dr. Kara Chism. Welcome, Kara.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here on the podcast today.
Well, we're excited to have you, and I'm excited to have you as our first guest on our new podcast. And with your background and experience, you are the perfect person to introduce our listeners to the 11 Principles Framework from character.org. But before we jump into the 11 principles, would you share with our listeners how you got involved in character education?
Yes, I got involved in character education really through Samford University. There was a pilot program that went on for about a year out of the Mann Center for Ethics and Leadership, where schools participated in character education and character development. And at the end of that first year, they wanted more. And they said, we want more of this. And so in response to that, Drayton Neighbors and Liz Huntley started a nonprofit called the Hope Institute at Samford. And the Hope Institute hired me just from an educational background just to kind of help those schools really dig deeper into character education. So I was fortunate enough to have some time to read everything I could about character education, to visit schools in our state and schools in other states to see what they were doing with character education. And then I had the opportunity to really soak it all in and see what was going on, which was super helpful. And every time I made a visit to a school or I talked to someone, I just got more and more excited about it and got deeper into the work. And when I was visiting schools, I really saw the difference that character education made. And I realized this is important. This is just as important as academics, and that's really why we have schools, for academics and to help them socially. And I realized it was changing lives, and so it was something that I wanted to be a part of because it was important in changing students' lives. So that's how I got involved in the character education.
That's awesome, and we'll be sure to include a link to the Hope Institute website in our show notes so that our listeners can learn more about Hope Institute. And I bet that was just amazing getting to visit the schools and see what's happening. And, the Hope Institute uses the 11 Principles Framework as a guide for schools. Could you summarize the framework for our listeners?
The 11 principles serve as guideposts that schools and other organizations can use to help develop character. And so it's not a script. It's not telling you have to do this, 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 and this in order to have a school of character or to have an organization that includes character, but they're guideposts, they're things to look for. And there were decades of research that were showing, okay, this is what works to help develop a culture of character. And then there were leaders in the field that got together and they studied effective practices in schools. They talked with practitioners and they came up with these 11 principles based on what works in schools and organizations and what really helps to create a culture of character. And so it may look different in every single school because every school or every organization is different, but the guideposts are going to be the same. Like in every institution, you need to have core values. That's principle number one. And everybody needs to be involved in creating those core values. And so you may go about it in a different way, but everybody should have them. The same as with Principle 11, that's evaluation. You need to evaluate it. However you do it is up to use. So the 11 principle framework were really created out of lots of research, leaders in the field, looking at effective practices, and they came up with these 11 principles that all schools or all organizations have. And they're very broad principles, but they really give you an idea of what excellence in character education looks like.
Well, I really love that they are grounded in school research. I love that. But could you share an example of how a school might use the 11 Principles framework as they're creating or maintaining cultures of character in their schools? I know you've gotten to visit a lot of schools, and could you just share maybe a concrete example of how a school might use that framework?
The first thing that a school should do is look at those 11 principles and give themselves a self-assessment, just to kind of go ahead and see where they are, give them some baseline data, and then look over that self-assessment and say, okay, number 6 is not one we're doing well. Let's focus on that one for a while. You can really start anywhere with the 11 principles. You don't have to look at them in order, but it's really good. I would say principle number 1 is a good place to start because it is the core values, and the core values guide everything that goes on in your school. And so if you don't know what you value and what you believe, it's kind of hard for everything else to fall in place. Some people also start with principle 11, which I would think is a good one as well, is to look at the data that your school has and where you need to, what are some items that need to work on. So the 11 principles, how I've seen them in schools is they will do a self-assessment and say, okay, you know what, number 8 is not our strongest one. What can we plan to implement this year, and see if we can't make number 8. And then as the year goes on, they'll implement things, and at the end of the year, go back and look and see if they've made any improvements in number 8. So they want to use that principle to kind of help them see what needs to be implemented, what's working, what's not. And at the end of that year, or at a set time, whenever the school decides, they'll use the collected data to determine if what they did was working or not. And I would encourage schools to choose a few to focus on annually. This is a marathon and not a sprint, because you want to bite it off a little time and work on things and implement them as to not overwhelm the school or you or anybody else. And you really want it to be something that is that has long life, and that isn't just something that you do for one school year, but it's something that can last a long time. So I would start off with using the 11 principles as a self-assessment to see where you are, and then pick a few of the ones that you may not be as strong in to work on for that year, evaluate them, and then you will either tweak those or pick some others for the following year.
That's really great advice, Kara, that you're giving about assessing and finding out the needs, and then only focusing on a few. Sometimes we in schools want to tackle everything, and it's a great suggestion just to choose a few and to really work on those. In your opinion, and based on your experiences, is there a specific principle that stands out as a North Star for schools and organizations, and why or why not?
I would say that principle number 1, which is promoting the core values, really does need to be the focus. And really, everything goes back to that. When you discipline a student in the building, you're going to discipline them based on your core values. So if your core values say that you respect everyone, you're going to respect that child in discipline. And you're going to respect the child in the classroom, when they're in the hallway, when they're on the school bus, when they're in extracurricular activities. So knowing what your core values are, that they're really defined, that you've implemented them, you've embedded them into the school culture, for me, that is the place to start. And everything else that happens in that school revolves around those core values. And another example would be someone wants to have a program at your school, but it really doesn't fit your core values. Then that's an easy thing to say, I'm sorry, thank you so much for offering this program at our school, but it really doesn't go along with what we value in the school. And so that gives an opportunity for you to really help narrow the focus of the school and help it move forward. So in my opinion, I think one of the most important things is to start off with those core values, have them, and realize that it guides everything in the school, but you also want to have the school community involved in them and buy into them. And I think that buy-in is really important to making the entire character education process work.
And so what are some of the best practices for schools when they're determining their core values?
That is a great question, and there's so many different ways of doing that depending on the age of the students. Um, and the size of the school. All of those things have an impact. There was one large high school, and they were trying to determine how are we going to figure out our core values. And they wanted the students to have input. And when you have almost 2,000 students, that's a lot of input to get and a lot of
For
data that you're
sure.
going to have. And so the faculty selected 25 that they thought might be good ones, and then they put them on a Google form and sent them out to students. And during an advisory period, the students ranked the top 5 or 6 that they thought really demonstrated values that their school had. And then from that, a list of core values was narrowed down. And then they selected the top 5 based on that. And so it gave everybody in the school the opportunity to have input in an organized way. And then, as far as getting parents and community involved, and another school had just posters up in the room and said, write down what you value at the school. And so they just kind of made a chart and a list of those, and they discussed those, and they took the key ones back to the faculty, and then the faculty had done the same thing. And so they were able to say, okay, this is what our stakeholders value, this is what we value, these are some things that are important in our school. One way that I've seen a lot of schools use this is they'll just all on little sticky notes write what they value, one value per sticky note. And then as a small team of 5 or 6, they will group them into categories. And then they'll get with another group of 5 or 6 people and group those until they come up with 5 or 6 values for their school. And that seems to work as well. I think any process that you use to get everyone's input is great, and it will be determined on the size of your school and how many students that you have. For example, a smaller school, if you've got a faculty of 30, you could probably do that in one setting. If you have 150 people, then you're going to need to do them in small chunks and put all their information together. So there's a variety of ways to do it, but that are all effective.
That's great. And I think the main theme is that it's not one set way for everybody. This is not a one size fits all, because it's going to be customized to each school, each climate, each culture is going to be determined individually and what works best for that school. In all of the schools, how would you describe the leader's role in using the 11 principles framework to build that culture of character?
The leader is crucial in making this happen, and they need to support the work. It doesn't mean that the leader is actually doing all the work. And in fact, when it works successfully, the leader isn't doing all the work. But the leader needs to be very, very supportive and empower leaders in the school and students in the school with building the culture of character. It needs to be kept in front of everybody all the time. Every time you have a faculty meeting, have something to do with character on it. If you're meeting with the PTA, you make a little statement about it. When you're talking on the announcements in the morning, that there's a statement about it. But you want to make sure that it really is a foundation that everything else in the school is built around. And so the leader's role is very important. And I have seen a few examples of the school where the principal is not leading the movement, so to speak, but it is another administrator, assistant principal at the school. And it has been so effective because the principal supports the assistant principal and the character team in creating this culture of character. Support is crucial, however that looks, but you've got to be able to support teachers being out of the building for professional development, time for teachers to collaborate to make this happen, time for students to work together to make it happen. It may even be a schedule change. So all those kinds of things are things that leaders can do to support it, but they have got to support it. If there's not support from the building leadership, the principal of the building, then it just doesn't happen.
Great answer. And I love how you've mentioned the student's role throughout all of this and throughout the use of the 11 principles framework. And, we both, I'm sure, have visited schools and worked with schools where even as young as kindergartners are able to give their input and be a part of this, be a part of building cultures of character. And so as we start to close our podcast episode, would you share with our listeners what communities of character means to you?
When I think of the term communities of character, I think of a group of people that are just passionate about becoming people of character and also striving to help everyone else become the best version of themselves and to be successful in everything they do, whether it's their job, with their academics, and that they're being able to fulfill their full potential. I think that communities of character learn together because they learn more about character. They serve together because when you serve with someone else, you're able to really put those characteristics into action and you're growing together as you do that. So when I think of a community of character, I think of a group of people that are super passionate, that they want to learn, serve, and grow together.
Awesome. So, Kara, do you have a book or a podcast recommendation that you have found to be impactful on your character education journey?
There are several books that I have found to be very, very helpful. As far as how to implement this in a school, Character Matters by Dr. Thomas Lacona is fabulous. It is a book that doesn't tell you step by step again what to do, but you can pick it up and say, okay, chapter 11 is really the what I need to have in a school. And so you can pick up chapter 11 and look through that and it will help you know where to get started. Or you might want to include student voice more in school, so you would choose a different chapter of that book. So it really is a great guide that helps implement character into the school day. Character is Destiny by Russell Go is a great book on really looking inside at your own personal character because we can't be role models for students if we don't have that character ourselves. So, Character is Destiny really helps you be introspective and think about your own character. And that has been another one that has really impacted me. And then Primed by Dr. Marvin Berkowitz is another one. And primed is such an easy concept. When you look at it, it's prioritizing character education. The R stands for relationships, I for intrinsic motivation, M for modeling, and then you're developmentally appropriate in what you do, and then you empower students is the E. And so really it's simple stuff. It doesn't cost money to do those things, but if you can just think about, okay, I need to prioritize this every day, I need to build relationships with students, I need to help them have that intrinsic motivation, I need to model it. So it's a very simple framework, but it is extremely powerful. And so those are the three books. They're all a little bit different, but those are the ones that have impacted me the most.
What awesome recommendations. I am not familiar with Character as Destiny, but I will definitely include links and titles and information in our show notes so that our listeners can connect with these resources. And what are the best ways for our listeners to engage with you?
The best way would probably be through Hope Institute or Samford University's Instagram pages. Hope Institute is at hope.institute, and Samford's School of Education is at Samford Education, or their websites. Both of them have websites. The website for Hope Institute is hopeinstitute.org. And if you want to find just resources about character, communities of character, Samford has a website. It's samford.edu/education/communities of character, which will have lots of amazing resources for character development in schools located on it. So those are the Instagram and website are the best ways to connect.
Awesome. I'm sure our listeners, after hearing from you and your experiences, may want to reach out and engage with you more. So thank you for that, and I'll be sure to include those links in the show notes. And we just thank everyone for listening to the Communities of Character podcast in our inaugural first episode. Before we go, show some love for us by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, and then stay tuned next month where we discuss with a school leader how core values are embedded into their school culture. Until next time.